Good morning. We are happy you are worshiping with us, whether you are here in this space with us or worshiping with us online. We are grateful to be able to gather together again. I understand that masks are not the most fun, but I would gladly take them any day if that means we can gather together in the same space. So as we get ready to worship, I invite you to pray with me this morning. God, we come into this place, we come into this time grateful. Grateful that as we lift our voices up to you, as we lift our praise up to you, God, you are pouring your Spirit down upon us. God, we ask you help to open our hearts and our minds, our eyes and our ears, so that we might feel your presence today. In your name we pray. Amen. Scripture reading this morning comes from the letter to Timothy, chapter 1, verses 3 through 5. I urge you, as I did when I was on my way to Macedonia, to remain in Ephesus so that you may instruct certain people not to teach any different doctrine, and not to occupy themselves with myths and endless genealogies that promote speculations, rather than the divine training that is known by faith. But the aim of such instruction is love that comes from a pure heart, a good conscience, and sincere faith. This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. So one of the biggest joys I have is that as much as Mass can be frustrating and annoying, last week we were able to gather for worship and everything went well. So we are able to gather again for worship, knowing that it's not exactly perfect, but nothing ever is, and God is still in this place. So as we come to our time of prayer, I would say one of the things I'd encourage you to lift up is as things continue opening, if this hasn't shown you anything, it's that sometimes opening requires a whole lot of extra legwork. Sometimes it's a little bit of an inconvenience, but yet God is still here. So I encourage you to lift up those who are having to kind of rework and reopen, and also for all of these things as we come back online. But I encourage you to pray with me now. God, as we come into this place this morning, we bring everything we have and everything we are. We bring our joys, our praise, our thanksgiving. We bring all of the good and the great gifts that you have poured down in our lives, God, and we bring gratitude before you. God, we even bring gratitude for the simple things, for the things we so often take for granted. God, coming just as we are means we bring our worry, our frustration, our uncertainty, all of our concern. We bring every single bit of it with us. And God, this morning, as we come into this place, we lay it down. Lay it down at your feet because we know, God, every step of the way you are with us. And not only are you with us, but God, right now, right here in this place, you are refreshing and renewing us, God. You are taking the burdens away from us, and you are replacing them with hope and joy and peace. God, you are reminding us what it is to be faithful. So, God, as we gather here this morning, as we prepare our lives, not just for this moment, but all of the moments that come after, we ask that you continue granting us that assurance. God, you go with us wherever we are. Because God, if you go with us wherever we are, then wherever we are, others may see you through us. We lift this prayer up to using the one that your Son taught us. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen. This morning, I want you to think about leadership. How do you define a good leader? What is a good leader to you? I know it's going to be defined differently from person to person, but when you think of people that have led well, what are the characteristics? Are they strong and commanding? Are they like a general that is courageous and knows when to act and knows when not to? Do they push you harder than you thought you could and yet still know when to pull back like a football? Are they more like a shepherd, someone who isn't necessarily out front but is leading and guiding with those kind words that just kind of gently nudge us in the direction we need to go? What are the attributes that seem to come through? Is it confidence? Is it courage? Is it a loud, authoritative tone? Is it soft-spoken and listening? I also want you to think about a bad leader. What makes a bad leader? What is it that you don't like when you see leaders do? Is it leaders who try to take the easy way when they shouldn't? Is it leaders that tell you what you want to hear even if it's not the right thing? Is it leaders that push you when you don't want to? Now, for just a moment, stop and think about what kind of leader you are. Every single one of you. Some of you are in positions where you're a natural leader in that field. But what I know is that every single one of us can be a leader. So when it comes down to it, what kind of leader are you? How do you most likely lead? Our letter today is a letter written to Timothy. It's the first letter we're reading that was not written just to a church, but is written to an individual person. And Timothy is one of Paul's disciples, not really a Paul disciple, but just someone that Paul has trained and mentored, someone who has been faithful, and so Paul has placed a great deal of trust in. And so Paul has given Timothy some instruction, and we read it in the passage you heard just a moment ago. His instruction to Timothy was that he needed Timothy to go to Ephesus and instruct. So Timothy's not just getting a "hi, how are you doing" letter. Timothy is getting a letter from Paul because the church in Ephesus is again having problems. We've already looked at the letter to the Ephesians, and the Ephesian church had a hard time being a church. They were a good group of people, right? There was nothing wrong with the individuals that gathered together, but they didn't really gel well as a community. They all came as individuals and they all left as individuals, but when it came down to how to live as a church family, they didn't quite do that too terribly well. And they're still having problems with it. Even after Paul writes his first letter to them, the church is still having some issues, so Paul's going to try a different approach. Instead of sending the letter directly to Ephesus, he sends a letter to Timothy, and he lays out what he thinks the problem is. Now, as he lays it out, what we very quickly discover is that the church in Ephesus had a problem with leadership. The church in Ephesus couldn't quite get their act together and go in the right direction. Verse 5 in chapter 1, he ends it, he says, "But the aim of such instruction is love that comes from a pure heart, a good conscience, and a sincere faith." The last several weeks you have heard me say time and time again, Jesus is the most important thing. That is Paul's understanding of who Jesus is. Jesus is so life-changing that Jesus should change everything about your life, and Jesus should be the most important thing. And if Jesus is the most important thing, then every decision and every action you make flows out of that. But we read that that's not the case in Ephesus. What's happening is the church leaders are kind of changing their view on things. And so Paul says you need to instruct certain people not to teach different doctrines, not to occupy themselves with myths and endless genealogies that promote speculation rather than divine training. It's a nice way of saying that really the church in Ephesus was starting to fall back on cultural norms. Right? Instead of having Jesus as the most important thing, we read later on that they started getting a little too carried away with being overindulgent. You have some people that were being overindulgent when it came to wine. Some of them were just being overindulgent with life in general. They were being extravagant. Instead of looking at the community, they were looking at themselves. We know greed became a problem that started getting into the church. They were more concerned with how much and what they had than what the community was doing. And so Paul says, look, the leadership is very much veering away from where they should be going. And they need to be reminded of this. They need to be reminded that Jesus Christ is the most important thing, and as such, their actions should reflect that. Now, it's interesting, because normally when we start thinking about problems with leadership, the typical response is that you just replace the leader. Right? If the leader is the problem, then you replace the leader, get a good leader, and everything will make sense. So it would make sense for Paul to say, hey, Timothy, I know that you're faithful, I know that you're loyal, I know that you believe in Jesus Christ, I know that you won't veer away like the other people did. How about you go be the leader in the church in Ephesus? Right, that would have been a simple solution. Paul could have just said, you be the leader, the church is back on track, no problem whatsoever. But that's not the route that Paul chose. Because Paul saw this crisis in leadership as less about one individual person and more about the community of believers. And so he words it that way. He says, I need you to go and instruct certain people. Instruct certain people. Paul is not exactly abundantly clear. Paul doesn't say, hey, you need to go talk to the pastor and tell the pastor to quit being lazy and to tell the pastor to quit being indulgent and tell the pastor to quit being so greedy. Right? He doesn't name one person. He says certain people. And here's the other catch. Paul never names who those people are. So it's not like Paul has a list of the board of stewards that he wants him to go and talk to. Instead, Paul is leaving this open-ended. Paul is leaving it as an open-ended list because here's another little bit of something you need to grasp. When Paul is looking at leadership, especially leadership with a crisis in faith, it's on everybody. It's not just about one person or a couple of people. It's about the whole community. So I want you to jump with me to chapter 3. I'm going to read out of verses 8 through 12. He says, deacons likewise must be serious, not double-tongued, not indulging in much wine, not greedy for money. They must hold fast to the mystery of faith with a clear conscience, and let them first be tested. Then if they prove themselves blameless, let them serve as deacons. Women likewise must be serious, not slanderers, but temperate, faithful in all things. Let deacons be married married only once, and let them manage their children and their households well. Verse 8, where we started, if you back up to chapter 3, verses 1 through 7, Paul writes about the qualifications of a bishop. Right? And that would be the kind of letter we would expect if it was a question about leadership. If the leadership's messed up, you replace the leader at the top. If the general lost the battle, you replace the general. If the football coach lost the game, you replace the coach. That's how we treat leadership. When leadership is in trouble, you replace the leader and pretend like everything's fixed. So Paul writes that. He writes the qualifications of a bishop. And the bishop is really just the one overseeing the church in Ephesus, the spokesperson, if you will, for what's going on. But that's not where Paul stops. Paul's letter says certain people, it doesn't say one person, and so Paul goes on to talk about deacons. Now, Paul was writing to a very Baptist church, apparently, in this. Methodists, we don't have deacons. We don't do deacons. We never really have done deacons very well. And so when Paul's writing this, he's not just talking about leaders who were pulled aside and said to be good enough. Or when we think of other leadership in a church, take me out of it as the pastor. You tend to either think of the church staff, or you think of the board of stewards, or you think of those in charge of ministry areas. You think of the leaders who are up and in front of everybody. And that's who we would define, at least in Paul's understanding, of who a deacon is. But if you reread it, what you notice is Paul doesn't exactly say what a deacon is. He names the office of deacon. It can be a man, it can be a woman, but he doesn't say what they do. He doesn't say that there are 5 per church and they're called because they're the most important or they're the most influential. In fact, Paul doesn't really care about that aspect of it. Notice Paul doesn't define the deacons as we would traditionally do it a leader. We would say it needs to be someone with influence and someone who has a good head on their shoulders and someone who has a clearly commanding voice and someone who knows what they're doing. Paul doesn't care about any of that. When Paul starts talking about being a good leader, what he says is you need to be a genuine person, right? Not double-tongued. He says don't be overindulgent. He names wine, but there are plenty of other things in life that we can be overindulgent in. Don't be greedy. Don't let pride and ego dictate what you're doing. And he says they must have a clear conscience about the mysteries of faith. A really fancy way of saying they need to put Jesus Christ first. Paul is less concerned about naming what the leader does and more concerned with actually making it clear that leaders should be people that are rooted and grounded in Jesus Christ. And in what Jesus Christ is doing in their lives. They shouldn't be those that are being swayed away, those that are being led to other areas, those who are listening to what's outside the church. Now, Paul does mention in that very last verse we read, it says, let deacons be married only once and let them manage their children and their households well. It can be a slightly problematic verse if you have been married more than once. But I want you to hear this. And even if you haven't been divorced or married more than once, I want you to listen to this in the way it pertains to relationships. Because in this, I don't think Paul is saying that you stay in a bad marriage just to stay in a bad marriage. I think a lot of times when it comes to healing and unity, when it comes to Jesus Christ being able to restore us, there are times where relationships are toxic and detrimental beyond any repair. And there are times it is okay to leave a relationship. I don't think Paul would have any issue with that whatsoever. If the person you are in the relationship has no concern with your well-being, has no concern with getting better, is toxic and destructive, that's fine. But here's where I want you to pay attention to this relationship thing, especially if it's marriage or any other relationship. Sometimes we have a habit of being in relationships for self-gratification, for what we get out of it. You make me feel good, you make me feel better, you give me the attention I need, you tell me what I want to hear, and a lot of times the minute that self-gratification in relationship goes away, so does our desire to be in the relationship. The minute we don't think we're getting out of it what we should or what we deserve, the minute something else comes along, we cut the relationships off. You see, this is where I think Paul is speaking into this. When we get rid of relationships just because they're not suiting us, or they're not doing anything for us, and we're being so selfish that we can't continue on, that's where it becomes a problem. And it fits in the same vein as the overindulgence and the greed, because what we do in those kind of relationships is we place ourselves first above absolutely everything else. And so if that is how we live our life, if we're placing either wine or money or anything we're overindulging in, or if we are placing ourselves before Jesus Christ, then how can we be a truly good leader that Jesus Christ has called us to be? So Paul lays out what it is to be a good leader in the church. Again, I want you to notice as Paul is talking about being a cohesive church, Paul doesn't name how many deacons there are. Paul doesn't name what they should do. Paul firmly believed that if we live our lives the way we're supposed to, each and every one of us, we are a leader. Now I know that statement can be uncomfortable, because if you are a leader, that means people are looking up to you. That's the definition of being a leader. You instruct people in the way to go, right? We don't like being a leader because that means people are looking at us, and what happens if we misstep? We like when there's another leader and we just kind of play on the sides. But here's the thing. Coming in here, living a life of faith in Jesus Christ means you have hope and joy in your life. Sure, life is still hard and difficult. There's still uncertainties. There's still problems. I understand that. But we are surrounded by a world that is desperately seeking hope and peace and joy and just doesn't know where to find it. And so as you leave here with Jesus Christ as the most important thing, and you go and live a life of hope and joy, people are watching what you're doing. They know you come here. They know you come here on Sunday morning, and you keep getting up when you don't have to, and you wear a mask when it's inconvenient, and you do all of these things. People know that, and so they are watching you. You are instructing inadvertently people in the way to go, which means congratulations, every single one of us is a leader. What does it look to live your life with that understanding? To know that you have been called to be a leader wherever you are. Not just a leader about what makes you comfortable, but a leader about how Jesus Christ has forever changed your life. Every single one of us, as we gather here, you have different gifts and graces that God has blessed you beyond measure with. And you've got gifts and graces that no one else in this place has. We're being called to step up, to lead. Not necessarily to be the one that has to stand here and to speak, but to lead in the way that God has called you to be faithful, to be someone who keeps Jesus Christ as the most important thing and lets everyone see and know that. What does your life look like if you live in such a way that everywhere you are, people can see the joy and hope in Jesus Christ, even if they can't name it? Ephesus as a church could not come together because they were so busy squabbling, trying to point the blame at someone else, trying to lift the finger at someone else. What happens if we come together and recognize we all have a part to play, to be a leader in some area or some regard? How powerful do we become as a church then? When we don't just say that Jesus Christ is the most important thing, but our actions show it. Let us pray. God, this morning when we come before you, knowing that it's easier to stand in the shadows. It's easier to sit back. It's easier to let someone else. God, we also know that you have called us. Each and every one of us. You've blessed us. You've called us to serve and to lead wherever we are. So God, this morning we give ourselves over to you. In your name we pray. Amen. We come to our time of offering, that time where we give back out of the abundance God has given us. We have got several ways which you can give your offering this morning. If you are worshiping with us online, you can give online at stlukeskilgore.com, mail your check in, or drop it off by the church office. If you are here in the worship space with us, there is a plate by the back door. It looks just like our offering plates that we pass around, that you can leave your offering in back there. But now I invite you to lift up this offertory prayer with me. God, this morning we bring our first fruits. We bring the best that we have because you have blessed us beyond measure, and we offer it to you. And so, God, this morning we ask you to take these offerings, that you bless them, and use them for the building of your kingdom. Amen. Amen. As we come to our last song, I'm going to encourage you to go ahead and stand up. We've been sitting a long time. So go ahead and stand and join with us. If you are interested in becoming a member of St. Luke's, you can come forward. You can leave a comment on Facebook. You can call the church office, and we will be in touch with you. benediction. If you just go ahead and sit back down, the ushers will help lead you out the back door so don't all get jammed up at the back door. But now, hear this benediction. As we leave here, as we go out with the God who goes with us. A God who leads us and guides us wherever we go. Amen and amen.